You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Packers Talk.
You're listening to No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Radio Network, your home for in-depth and thoughtful Packers analysis. I'm your host, Gil Martin. My co-host is my good friend, Sean Tehan. In addition to this show, I write for the PackersPost.com and Cheesehead TV. And Sean was a TV sportscaster in Minnesota. We're here to talk Packers because you're all here for one thing, and that's a love for Green Bay football. Sean, the offseason is in full swing. But before we get to free agency and the draft, how about a word from our sponsor?
Yeah, we're not quite at Packer season yet, but there's still some games you can see, especially in the state of Wisconsin, or some events you can go to. Our show is sponsored once again by Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packer fans, as well as the Bucks, the Brewers, and Summerfest tickets. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com. That's theticketking.com. You can see the link right there on your screen if you're watching with us on YouTube, or you can visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. Remember to support local Wisconsin businesses. Milwaukee Bucks playing some great basketball ever since the NBA trade deadline. Opening day right around the corner for the Milwaukee Brewers and Summerfest. Hey, they got some good shows coming up. I'm going to see the Killers this summer at Summerfest. So, hey, join in on the action. Get on Ticket King. And again, if you're following with us on YouTube today, thank you so much for tuning in. Click the bell, turn the notifications on. You can join the discussion, chat with Gil and myself live. Love to see you talk about the comments coming our way. And, man, we got a lot to talk about, Gil, today, especially with the NFL Combine coming up or wrapping up this past week, and a lot of stuff coming up ahead in the NFL world, per se.
Yeah, it's a heck of a time, isn't it? I mean, there is no off season anymore. I think we sort of have to face that.
Yeah, and that's all right because, hey, we're looking for content, Gil, and if the NFL provides content 365 days a year, 52 weeks a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, or as Will Ferrell impersonating George Bush on SNL said, 24 hours a week, 7 months a year, but it's not quite that. It's a little more than that right now in the NFL world. But, hey, man, the NFL Draft Combine is just the beginning of the offseason fun when the Chicago Bears, obviously, they dominate this time of year. They're offseason champs for a reason, year in and year out. But it's still a lot of good stuff to talk about. And let's just get right to it. Our top 5 NFL draft crushes. The Combine in Indianapolis wrapped up. And, Gil, we got some guys who really shine, some guys who didn't participate but may have shined at the Senior Bowl or elsewhere. And we got a short list, each of us, for our top 5 draft crushes when it comes to the Green Bay Packers. Start us out, Gil. Who's number 5 on your list to start out?
Number 5, Shamar Stewart, defensive lineman out of Texas A&M.
And Shamar Stewart, I mean, this is a guy where he did not have a lot of production on the stat sheet in college, but he's a freak of nature. He's an athletic monster. The only concern I have with Shamar Stewart, Gil, is this Lucas Van Ness 2.0, where Lucas Van Ness has shown some flashes, but the consistency isn't quite there. And who knows, maybe Lucas Van Ness is primed to take off in year 3, but it seems like the Packers make a habit of taking developmental projects early and in the draft. And Shamar Stewart, I hope he doesn't fall in line, but give us a little more reason why you like Shamar Stewart so much.
I mean, the athleticism, that's something the Packers always look for. He's 6'6", 290, he's strong, he's fast, and he's someone who could line up, on the nose as a 3-tech, even possibly at end, and move all over the line, try to take advantage of some of the matchups. He can stop the run, and he can get after the passer. The skills are there, and I guess I put him at 5 because he's a Brian Gutekunst type. Yeah,
and it makes sense, but I think what was his relative athletic score at the Combine again? Wasn't it? It was like a 9.8 or so. It was really high.
It was like top of the line, yeah.
And he was a Combine warrior, and the Packers love to draft guys with that high relative athletic score. We're going to be referring to quite a bit in this episode with our top 5 draft crushes coming up. But Shamar Stewart, I feel like the Combine that he had, I think he's going to go a lot earlier than anticipated.
That's very possible.
And I think there are a lot of Packer fans who are kind of by where it's like, okay, this guy is a physical freak. He's huge. Like he could develop into a real stud in the NFL. And there are other people who are like, well, the production wasn't there. And we don't want Lucas Van Ness 2.0, at least early on in Van Ness's career right now. But the Packers may not get a chance to draft him because if this guy seems like he only improved his draft stock last week, and Packers may not have a shot to even get him, Gil.
They may not. And yet that may be another reason why, if he's available, I could see Goody just running that card up and, hey, here he is.
Now, would you trade up for him, or would you just sit back and just, if he drops to you take him?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I would not trade up for a guy without the production. See, that's the thing. If he falls into your lap, great. I could see Brian Gutekunst taking that chance, but to trade up for a guy who has the tools but not the production, that really kind of worries me.
I'm with you there. And I actually went D-line with my 5th overall draft crush, but this is a guy that I project is going to be a day 3 pick, but worth taking on day 3 if he's there. That's Indiana defensive lineman CJ West. And CJ West, his stats didn't really jump out on paper. He's a bit undersized, 6'1", 316, but his relative athletic score was really good, 9.14. He was a big reason why Indiana was an 11-2 football team last year and surprisingly made their way into the college football playoff. They got in over a team like Miami, who has the potential number 1 pick in Cam Ward at quarterback. They got in over Alabama, who's Alabama. And I know a lot of people were saying, oh, Indiana didn't deserve to be in the college football playoff, but hey, they had the closest margin of defeat in that first round of the playoffs amongst all the teams that were in there in round 1 or who lost in round 1.
Low bar, but yes.
Yeah, and CJ West is a guy, though, where he was a transfer from Kent State. He's an older college football player, but he's a guy who opened up a lot for that Indiana defense. That Indiana defense was really good because CJ West was a big factor on the front line. And the Packers have a history of drafting undersized but talented defensive linemen on day 3 of the draft. Most recently, Carl Brooks, who's looked like a really, really nice rotational lineman in the NFL. Mike Daniels, another guy who was really undersized in the NFL and had a really, really good career when he was coming out of Iowa. He had a really good NFL career. CJ West's the guy who, if he's there on day 3, round 5, round 6, it's worth taking a flyer on him.
I could totally see the Packers doing that. So, yeah, I concentrated more with my crushes on round 1, but
that's fair.
If I was going, in a deep dive like that, he would be on my list as well.
Yeah, and this is me create discussion. So more so. And if the Packers draft CJ West, I will be very, very happy about that. I know he's a tiny guy, but you know what? Hey, tiny guys can win on the D-line as long as you're powerful. That leverage is everything, man. Aaron Donald was 6'1". I'm not saying CJ West is Aaron Donald, but it's been done before. Gil, who's number 4 on your list? Just
to show I'm not biased.
I love
not
this.
Prejudiced. I actually went with a player from Ohio State. So,
hey, all right.
Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver. Wide receivers from Ohio State is like a given in the last few years. And to me, Egbuka, I mean, if you think that the Packers need a guy who doesn't drop the ball and manages to get open consistently, who can be that, it's 3rd and 7, I need, I'm going to get 8 yards every time I look to this guy almost. I think Egbuka could be that kind of guy. He could be a security blanket, a go-to guy for Jordan Love. Whether that'll happen right away in his rookie year, well, a lot of the other Ohio State receivers have indeed been able to do that. But, I just think this guy has so much ability and such a bright future. I could really, whether it's first round or if somehow here's a guy I would trade up for if he falls to the early second, but I don't think he will.
Yeah, Emeka Egbuka is a guy that I really like, Gil, and you're tugging at my heartstrings because this guy was awesome at Ohio State. Like you said, he has the knack for making the big play, but he reminds me of a stronger Chris Olave. And Chris Olave has been a very good pro. He's dealing with the concussion issues, unfortunately, from this past year with the New Orleans Saints. But Emeka Egbuka, he's a guy I hope drops to Green Bay, but I think he's going to get scooped up a lot earlier. He has, like you said, he has good hands. He's a really good blocker on the edge. Terrific guy in the locker room. Terrific. He was a terrific leader at Ohio State. a guy who is only going to improve the character of your football team. And he's a guy that I feel like is just bound to be a 10-year pro in the NFL. He just has that swagger to him, and he has that feel where it just everything comes natural to him.
Yeah. And he would be a very welcomed addition. But will the Packers go wide receiver in the first round for the first time in like 20 years? That's the big question.
Hey, Brian Goodwin said he's not against it. It's got to be the right guy that's there. But fourth on my board, I'm sticking with the Buckeyes, but I'm going in the trenches here, Gil. And that is offensive lineman Donovan Jackson. He didn't do enough testing at the combine to qualify for a relative athletic score. He's about 6'3", 315, turns 23 in December. Second team All-American at guard this year, but he probably would have been first team, but he bumped out the left tackle midway through the season last year. A big reason why the Ohio State Buckeyes end up winning the national championship. 40 starts at Ohio State, 3-time All Big Ten offensive lineman. Again, he was a great left guard. Their left tackle, who is going to be a first-round pick most likely coming up next month, Josh Simmons, he tore his ACL. They had some stopgaps at left tackle, didn't really work. Donovan Jackson slides out to left tackle, and he was terrific. And the Packers love offensive linemen with versatility who can play multiple positions. Donovan Jackson fits that bill, man. He was so good. He faced some really good competition at left tackle too. In round 1 of the college football playoffs, the Buckeyes played against Tennessee. James Pierce Jr., who's projected to be a first-round pick, 9.34 relative athletic score. He shut him down. Faced off against Oregon, a guy like Jordan Birch and Mateo Uiagalelei. Both guys had 8.5 plus sacks on the year. Shut them down. Texas, Colin Simmons, 9 sacks. Shut him down. Barron Sorrell, who's going to be a draft pick this year, shut him down against Texas. And then Notre Dame. He was amazing. And Will Howard had a terrific postseason because Donovan Jackson was a damn good left tackle. This is a guy where the Packers need some depth on the O-line. They have good talent on the O-line, but they need some depth. Donovan Jackson's a guy where if he's available, I'm definitely strongly considering that pick.
So I could totally see that. How are we 2 Buckeyes in a row? What's going on here?
Yeah, hey, Ohio State's got a lot of great football players, man. There's a reason they won the college football championship. I did want to put a Michigan guy in my top 5, just didn't have room. Guys like a Kenneth Grant. Mason Graham is my ultimate crush from Michigan, but Mason Graham is not going to even
not going to be there. Yeah,
if he falls out of the top 10, you try to make a trade up because there's no way. I don't think he falls out of the top 10. Gil, moving on. Number 3 on your list.
Moving on to number 3. This is a tough one, but I went with Siobhan Revell Jr. out of East Carolina. If he hadn't been injured, there'd be no way the Packers could get him at 23. But, he's got the size. Before the injury, he definitely had the speed. 6'2", $195 is just screaming Packers type. They don't have a guy with that kind of size, so it would really kind of fill that need. He's got explosiveness. He can play the slot. He could play the perimeter. And he really was considered before the injury as the best cover corner in the draft. So, the injury may allow him to slide down to 23, and he may need a little extra time this year before he's ready. He had the ACL in September. So usually it's 10 months. So you're talking about July, which is right around when training camp gets started. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he may have a little bit of a slower start, but boy, I love this kid's future.
Man, and you got to think that's something that the Packers are going to weigh where, hey, is this a guy worth taking round 1 or if he's available in round 2 to use that second round pick on him? Because it's tough. This kid is talented. And like you said, 6'2" corner. Are you kidding me? Like that's a dream, man. Oh yeah. And you need a guy with the size and the athleticism and the speed like Siobhan Revell Jr. has to go against guys like Justin Jefferson, to go against guys like, Jameson Williams, if he has more consistency, a guy like guys like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze in Chicago, guys you're going to see multiple times a year, Jordan Addison in Minnesota too. You have a guy like that bolsters your room, but the whole thing is, will he be available? Remember, Green Bay last year picked Jordan Morgan in round 1, a guy who had an ACL tear earlier in his career, but they did their medical homework. They did just they talked to doctors and everything like that and felt pretty good about Jordan Morgan. Luckily, the ACL wasn't the issue this past year.
Shoulder.
Unfortunately, the shoulder, hopefully it's not a head, shoulders, knees, and toes situation for Jordan Morgan going forward. But Siobhan Revel, that's a good pull right there, Gil. A guy that I had probably in my top 10, but because of that injury, that's just the concern on my end.
It's a concern for me too, but I just love the upside potential here, and I'm willing to wait a couple of months. If he has a less impactful rookie season, but ends up being a Pro Bowl kind of a guy consistently, I'll take that.
And you wonder, too, the Packers love to draft guys early who they feel like could develop into superstars.
Yep.
But Brian Gutekunst has made it known it's time to start competing for championships. Maybe they take a guy who's more ready now rather than who's going to be ready later, because it feels like the time to act now. Now, number 3 on my list, it's an edge rusher, and he's from Marshall. His name is Mike Green. You probably know this name. He didn't test for the NFL Combine, but he had a terrific Senior Bowl. He led the nation this year with 17 sacks in 2024. He was a first-team All-American. He did start his college career in Virginia. He transferred to Marshall after he was accused of sexual assault, which he's never been charged, but he's been accused twice, once in high school, once in college. You hope the accusations are only that, accusations and nothing more. But if it's nothing more than accusations and he's not, if he never gets charged or anything like that, or if his background is something that's cleared up by the Packers and they get some more clarity on the situations that happened in the past, it's a guy worth keeping on. Green Bay needs an edge rusher. This guy could bring a lot of speed and juice to the edge rusher group. And he reminds me so much of Von Miller, where Von Miller was not the biggest guy coming out of Texas A&M. And he's not the biggest guy even right now. He's 6'3", 250. You know what Mike Green's size and height and weight is? 6'3", 250.
No.
And it's just right on, where I highly doubt Green Bay would use a draft pick in round 1 on a guy like Mike Green, where he's a little bit undersized and he has a little bit of that history in the background. But if you want to add some juice to that pass rush, I think this is a guy that I would strongly consider.
Yeah, I mean, you hope that they do the background check and make sure that, it is just accusations, because you don't want to bring, controversy and issues into the locker room. But if he does check out, the talent is there. Do you think he'll be available in round 2?
I think there's a chance. I do think there's a chance, just because of the size and everything like that. And it's going to be fascinating because the defensive line group, and I know number 2 on your board is also defensive lineman, Gil, for Draft Crushes. The defensive line group in general, edge rushers, defensive tackles, whatever it may be, is just so deep this year in the draft. And you just wonder where teams are going to have Mike Green on their board, because I think he's got the talent to be a top 15 pick, but it's just playing at a smaller school and not being the biggest guy of the bunch, a very productive player. Maybe NFL teams don't see the upside there.
Or it could also factor in that because the position is so deep, they don't draft one in the first round, figuring there'll still be good guys available day 2, day 3. And we have other positions where there's a shortage and we need to prioritize them.
Man, I'm just glad we're not the ones running the operation, because I'd be flummoxed and I would be stressing any little decision I would make. Gil, I alluded to you having a defensive lineman on your board at number 2. Tell us who that is.
That would be Oregon's Derek Harmon, defensive tackle. Again, a guy with 5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, 55 pressures, can move all around the line, which is something that obviously the Packers like. And look, let's face it, how many more years? We don't know about TJ Slayton coming back. How many more years do you have with Kenny Clark? This is a guy who is versatile, who could stop the run, who could put some pressure on the quarterback, could line up in different positions. I don't know if he'll still be there at 23. Probably not. But boy, he just screams Packers type to me.
Oh, he definitely does. But the beauty of this is there's a good chance I think he is available, Gil, because of the depth at that position.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of it only takes one team to fall in love with you. And If he's not there, I'm not going to be surprised. But if he is there, I'm not going to be surprised either. It's just he's a good player, and the Packers. Brian Gutekunst made it very well known last week at the Combine. They need to improve the pass rush. They need to improve the defensive front, and I feel like they're going to use a lot of resources in free agency, in the NFL draft, and they're just going to pick the best player available at the D line, and hopefully sign maybe a guy or two in free agency or trade for someone possibly. It's a fascinating situation. Derek Harmon or the Oregon Ducks were 13-1 last year. They're the number one seed in the college football playoff. Derek Harmon was a big reason why. That defense was nasty, and he was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, he was. And I, like I said, I would love the colors would be the same, a little different hue, but same, basic colors. I would love to see him in a Packers uniform. How about you? Where were you with number 2?
So number 2 is actually the number 1 guy on your board, Gil. So I'm going to let you take it away with number 1 on your board because we're going to be talking about the same player.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Number 2.
All right. Well, my number 2, it's Texas cornerback Jahdae Barron. And if you're watching with us on YouTube, you can see on your screen, I have Gil's number 1 being Texas corner Jahdae Barron. And we're going to talk about Jahdae because this guy, we were talking about how Siobhan Revel screams Packer. This guy screams Packer.
Yeah.
He really, really does. He had a great combine. He was a terrific corner at Texas, a team that went to the national semifinals this year. 9.00 relative athletic score, 5'11", 194. So he's not the tallest guy, but he's not the shortest guy either. 67 total tackles last year, 11 pass deflections, 5 interceptions last year with the Longhorns, was a first-team All-American. My only concern here, he's a bit of an older player. He's turning 24 in December. But he was the primary defender against Ohio State stud freshman wideout Jeremiah Smith in their national semifinal matchup in the college football playoff against Ohio State. And Jeremiah Smith was held to 1 catch for 3 yards. And Jahdae Barron, I know he had some help over the top, but Jahdae Barron did his job underneath. I feel like the Packers need some help at nickel corner, especially if they want to move Keyshawn Nixon to a full-time job on the outside and Carrington Valentine if they want to play him on the outside or sign a guy in free agency who plays the outside. Jahdae Barron could fit very nicely in this Green Bay secondary.
And the other thing I love about him, he played the slot and he played the boundary. So
yes,
you get both. He broke up 11 passes, picked off 5. He's got the speed, 4.39. He, size-wise with the height and weight, kind of similar to Jair, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Not too big, but not too small either. And I just think, again, one of these guys who just Jeff Hafley would love. He could line them up in different places and have that, deceptive situation off the snap of the ball where the quarterback and the opposing coaches have to guess, here's where we're lined up. Where do we go from here? And
you figure, too, where watching this guy, he's not afraid to tackle either. He's not afraid to get in there.
That's a good thing.
And that's a very good thing. That's something that Packers secondary definitely needs, especially on the nickel spot where the nickel corners has to do quite a bit. The secondary generals has to do quite a bit in Green Bay. And you're very reliant on the pass rush, getting to the quarterback and everything like that. And these defensive backs, these corners and safeties reacting quickly and keeping their eyes on the quarterback. And a guy who has experience playing in the nickel, playing so close to the football, and Jahdae Barron could be a really nice fit. And a guy he's obviously played in some great competition. He's had some great competition at the college level too. I feel like if the Packers, if Brian Gutekunst is right, if he sticks to his word that they need to compete for championships now, this guy's a day one starter right away.
Yeah, and that fits in again with what this team has been saying that they want to do. Again, is he available? Well, that's the other question. But I think if he is, I could see the Packers being very excited and not even using the full time allotted to bring that card up to the podium.
Oh, it's gonna be very interesting. We got some. I think we've brought up some really good names so far, Gil. That I think some viable options who could be available in round 1. Obviously, CJ West. That's a day 3 dream pick for me.
Right.
So, hey, we can have draft crushes wherever. You can find a superstar anywhere in the NFL draft. That's the beauty of the NFL draft. Number 1 on my list, and it's a wide receiver I'm willing to draft in round 1, and that is Iowa State's Jaden Higgins. He had a stellar combine last week. He dazzled at the Senior Bowl back in January. 9.85 relative athletic score. That was the 4th highest amongst all receivers at the combine. He's 6'4", 214 pounds, turns 23 in December, was a third-team All-American this past year after racking up 87 catches, more than 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns in 13 games at Iowa State. He's just a ridiculous athlete, Gil. He's one of the best players for a terrific Iowa State team, which finished 11-3 last year. He has some great hands, only had 7 drops on 350 career targets for the Cyclones. Christian Watson is going to miss a lot of time in 2025. Jaden Higgins could be Christian Watson 2.0 with his size and his ability to get vertical and really stretch out defenses. This guy, he may end up, he may be worth snapping that Packer wide receiver draft list streak coming up in April.
Yeah, he may very well be. And, like you said, Goody said, it wasn't like the Packers don't believe in drafting a wide receiver. It just the board hasn't fallen that way when their needs were met. You got to remember 2020, the Packers wanted to draft a receiver, traded up to draft a receiver, ended up the guys they wanted were off the board, and they picked some guy named Jordan Love. So, which may have worked out for the best, but here we are. And, the thing is, he's got to be ready from day one.
Yeah.
Or they're going to have to go out and get somebody else for day one. And, that's sort of the thing that's up in the air in my mind. But he's a great player. I could totally see him fitting in beautifully in Green Bay.
Packers could be double dipping at receiver this offseason in free agency and in the draft. He's a guy, and it's funny. It's like you mentioned, the Packers tried to trade up for a wide receiver in 2020. They also tried to trade up for, ironically, Christian Watson in 2022, and then only for the Vikings to wait until day 2 to make that trade with the Packers for Watson to be drafted early in the second round. But speaking of wide receivers, though, and the Packers, obviously, they're in the market for a top wide receiver, possibly a veteran wide receiver. And the report that came out last week that made a pretty big splash was the Packers trying to set up a trade for Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf. Corbin Smith of Emerald Spectrum Sports in Seattle reported last week that a team to keep a close eye on when it came to the Metcalf sweepstakes last Friday were the Packers in regards to a trade for DK. Smith reported a source indicated to him that Seattle and the Packers have had some discussions, and the Packers reportedly had an offer on the table, which included a high pick and a young receiver. Smith later reported Seattle wants a first-round pick in return in either Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks in exchange for DK in a day 3 draft selection. Now, remember, Seattle GM John Schneider, Brian Gutekunst, the GM for the Green Bay Packers, they have a history going back to their days together as scouts in Green Bay. And Metcalf just requested a trade the other day out of Seattle, and it's maybe the stars are aligning, but for a first-round pick, Gil, I don't know if that's worth the price, but should the Packers aggressively pursue a guy like DK Metcalf? He's entering the final year of his contract. You're going to need to sign him to an extension. He's going to be an expensive player, but a player who Brian Gutekunst was very high on in the draft a few years ago, and a guy who's been productive in the NFL and would instantaneously make that receiver room better. Should the Packers make this move?
The price is just a little too high.
The reported price, yeah.
The reported price, right. And look, it's all subject to negotiations. So where you start off and where you end up are not usually the same place. But let's face it, you're talking about giving up a first-round pick most likely, plus one of your young wide receivers, plus you got to pay the guy. So you're talking about probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million a year going forward. His age is fine. His skill set speaks for itself. I would love him in a totally, abstract world. I'd love for him to be a Green Bay Packer. It's just a question of whether the cost of bringing him in would be too great.
And Brian Gutekunst, he has reportedly always been in trade talks for guys like years ago it was Will Fuller, but the Texans wanted a 3rd-round pick, and Gutekunst wasn't willing to give up more than a 4th-round pick. Ended up being a good deal. They had a deal on the table supposedly for Jace Claypool, a 2nd-round pick, but the Steelers took the Bears' 2nd-round pick because they figured they'd get a better 2nd-round pick. It worked out for the Steelers, worked out terribly for the Chicago Bears, and thankfully the Green Bay Packers didn't make that deal. I'll say that with Brian Gutekunst, if there's a guy he's willing to make a deal for, he will only go to his limitation. He will only go so far. He will not exceed his expectations. But if the or his realistic expectations essentially, but if the Packers do make a deal for DK Metcalf, if they include a receiver and a draft pick, I think the most I'd be willing to do, I'd be comfortable if they traded a guy like Romeo Doubs and they trade a 3rd-round pick, I'd be fine with that. The most I would stretch it to for a draft pick compensation is a 2nd-round pick, but that's it. I'm not giving up a 1st-round pick for DK Metcalf. I'm giving up a 1st-round pick for potentially an edge rusher who could make an impact on every single play, but not for a receiver. I'm sorry, I'm not doing that. That's just not the way that I'm doing it. I don't think the Packers are going to operate that way. I know I'm hearing Dontavian Wicks could be included in the deal. I like Dontavian Wicks' upside way more than I like Romeo Dobbs' upside, minus the drop issues from last year. But that's the furthest I'm willing to go for draft pick compensation is a 2nd-round pick.
I agree with you. And because the other thing is you got to sign him to an extension and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So,
yeah.
And he is going to be 28 by the end of this season. So it's not like, maybe you get 2-3 good years out of him, but the talent is there. But the other thing is this, what is his cost relative to some of the other available receivers' cost? Yeah. And then you got to figure out what the value is and how you make it happen.
I still got my dreams. I'm still salivating over a Devontae Adams reunion. That's if the Packers could get that done, forget this trade. Forget this trade.
Well, yeah. And you don't need to give up a draft choice or another receiver in the room. You just got to pay the man.
Nope, and I'd be totally fine with that. And that's Devontae Adams would make the most sense. But I think he's going to go back to the West Coast. If he comes back to Green Bay, man, I would freaking love that. Get reunited with Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love and that veteran presence for a young but talented receiving core in Green Bay. It'd just be the ideal fit, in my opinion. Now, speaking of free agency news or pre-free agency news, the Packers extended a couple players this past week. Linebacker Isaiah McDuffie to a 2-year, $8 million contract, could be worth up to $9.5 million, and kicker Brandon McManus to a 3-year, $15.3 million deal. Gil, I got to say right away, I'm satisfied with both these deals. McDuffie, he's a player who's been improving every year as a linebacker, good special teams player. Brandon McManus, he finally has provided some stability to the kicking spot since the Packers parted ways with Mason Crosby a few years ago. Overall, I'm satisfied with these deals. How about you?
I'm satisfied also. I think McManus was probably priority 1 as far as the guys who may be, unrestricted free agents if you don't re-sign them. How much better can you do than 30 of 30 on extra points and 20 of 21 on field goals?
Yeah.
The one miss, as you've mentioned in past shows, in the rain and the wind, where the wind literally just held. I had
a perfect view of that. That ball was going straight through the uprights, and then Mother Nature just took course. It's like, nope, you're not going anywhere near this. You know?
So, you can't do too much better than that. He was 3 for 3 from 50 yards or more. I'm glad they got him back. And then as far as McDuffie is concerned, I love his effort. He is smart. He works hard. Mm-hmm. He knows the game. He's got a high football IQ. He can contribute on special teams. He's very good against the run. I don't like him in coverage, but if he is either your primary backup at linebacker or a guy who's on the field on first down and, and short yardage situations, and then you put in Tyron Hopper or somebody else on obvious passing downs, I think that's great. He'll give you some leadership. Is $4 million a year plus the incentives a little higher than I might have gone? Yeah, but I'm not at all angry about this. I think good for him. It's what, 2% of the salary cap or whatever. It's like it. Yeah, it was a no-brainer. A solid player. Like, if he would have commanded more than $5 million a year, I would have been like, "Yep, see you later." Doors right there, But this is a perfect deal. I would have ideally, I would have liked 3 or 3.5 a year, but I'm not going to nitpick. Give the guy his money and let's move forward.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. Hey, AJ Dillon said when he went bald, it made him more aerodynamic. So it's like, hey, that works for me, man. If he keeps improving and keeps elevating his game like he has every year since he was drafted by the Packers back in 2020, I'm all for it. Gil, before we wrap up with some trivia, what articles do you have coming up on the Packers Post, Cheesehead TV? A lot coming from the Combine. Free agency is next week. We're going to be talking quite a bit about that. Hopefully the Packers make some moves that are not, hopefully they don't make moves just to make moves. Hopefully they make the right moves and the moves that we want to see them make.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of on a free agent kick this week. Latest for the Packers Post talked about 5 cornerbacks who the team might be looking at in free agency, who could help the team. And then over at Cheesehead, I took on the Devontae Adams question head on. I'd love to see him back, but I examined sort of the pros and cons and, whether or not the Packers should be seriously thinking about it.
I know there are Packer fans who are still upset when Devontae left and everything like that, but man, it's like that guy could come back at any time he wants. Honestly, it's like I'm open arms on my end. Gil, you ready for some trivia?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, after the conclusion of the NFL Draft Combine, we went over our draft crushes earlier in this episode for the 2025 NFL Draft. Number one on my list for the Packers, Iowa State stud wideout Jaden Higgins. Packers do have a history of Iowa State alumni donning the green and gold. Most recently was NFL veteran wide receiver Allen Lazard, who was undrafted out of Ames, took advantage of his opportunities with the Packers early in his NFL career. But the Packers have only drafted one former Iowa State Cyclone in the NFL draft in their franchise history. It's actually been within the last few years, Gil. Name the one former Iowa State Cyclone drafted by the Green Bay Packers.
The one former Iowa State. Oh, this is very recent.
Very recent, yeah. Within the last few years, yep.
Yeah, so that would be Anthony Johnson.
You nailed it. Safety Anthony Johnson. He was the 242nd overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. Johnson showed some promise as a rookie for Green Bay. He appeared in 12 games, started 4 of those games, registered 24 total tackles, 3 pass deflections, and an interception as a rookie. But then the Packers surprisingly released Johnson following the conclusion of training camp last August. New York Giants quickly claimed him off waivers. He appeared in 9 games, totaled 5 tackles last year in the Big Apple. Really rooting for Higgins to be the second Iowa State Cyclone drafted in Packers history in April, Gil. And I hope that we don't have to really rely on the Anthony Johnson Iowa State history, because I think Jaden Higgins would be an upgrade also from Allen Lazard when he was a Packer. And he was a good Packer, but Jaden, I really want Jaden Higgins. Get Jaden Higgins and Devontae Adams in Green Bay, please.
I would love to see it. I was always a big Allen Lazard fan. Just a great story watching him, go from undrafted free agent to, a really solid NFL receiver. So, yeah, that Iowa State been pretty good.
It's funny. Allen Lazard wasn't good enough for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but he's good enough for the Green Bay Packers as a contending team in Green Bay. It's just like good. Allen Lazard stories. It's very much NFL's a two-way street. So and hey, we got a big offseason ahead. If Jaden Higgins ends up in the division, but not with the Green Bay Packers, I'm going to lose my mind and I'm going to have nightmares. But hey, who knows? This is just the draft industrial complex getting in my head. But
deep breath.
Deep breaths. Like, just trust the process. Trust the guys in charge. That's all we can do, Gil. That's all we can do.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Unless you want to send your resume over to Brian Gutekunst.
No, I'm not even close to qualified. I'll be like, hey, man, like I played some guard in high school. I was an all-conference guy, but, you need someone. And they'll be like, we'll pay you. We'll give you an internship. It's like, yeah, I can't afford that, man. I got a mortgage to pay, Gil. We're busy people.
I hear you. I totally hear you.
Yeah,
all right. Well, that is going to do it for us. We'll be right back here next week. Follow us on Twitter @GilPackers and @GPackersOn. Stay up to date on all the Packers or to ask us questions. Or you can email us at gbpackerssean@gmail.com. Make sure you subscribe to Packers Talk on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks to PackersTalk.com for powering our show, and thank you for listening. Until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.